on a Friday evening to join our webinar session. So this is the second session on the Copilot for Microsoft 365 Zero to Hero webinar series. On the first session, we spoke about how to get started with Copilot for Microsoft 365. So today, I thought of how about we talk about what happened under the hoods, right? So this is where we're going to talk about Copilot for Microsoft 365 architecture and how it works. So my name is Vignesh. I work as an enterprise architect, and I'm also a Microsoft MVP and MCT. So Vijay is my co-speaker, so he works as a senior technical architect. So let's move on. So by the way, this is going to be a very small session. So I'm just going to briefly talk about the Microsoft 365 Copilot architecture and stuff. So this is going to be think of it as just more of an FYI, where I'm just going to give you how things are built under the hood, how Microsoft brings the different pieces together, and how is that you're seeing the results when you're using Copilot for Microsoft 365. So just want to make sure that I'm setting the right expectations for this entire webinar series and also for this session. So the targeted audience for this webinar series are the business users or power users, or maybe you could be working as a Microsoft 365 administrator, or even you could be an architect, right? You could be a technical architect, or you could be even a solution architect, or you could be a developer or IT admin, and as I said, a solution architect or sales professionals. So no matter whichever profile you're representing, right? So that is a good takeaway for you in this entire webinar series, right? So the end goal, we want to make sure that you get yourself familiarized with the Copilot for Microsoft 365 concepts. You understand the deployment methods. You understand what does it take to customize the experience of Copilot for Microsoft 365, right? And also, if at all you're planning to do some development, what does it take? And what about privacy, security, and compliance? So today I'll be sort of talking on at a very high level on the privacy, security, and compliance. But of course, we'll be having deep dive sessions on privacy, security, and compliance in this journey, and also about licensing and some deployment best practices that So I and Vijay have deployed this service in large enterprises for the last 1 year or so. So we have some good learnings that we would like to share in this webinar series. So some key takeaways, we want to make sure that you walk out of this session having a good understanding about Copilot for Microsoft 365. And as I said, you understand how to use the service, how to deploy it, customize it, and more importantly, how to securely deploy and administer this for large enterprises. And our expectations for someone who's attending this webinar session is to make sure that you have a very detailed working knowledge or understanding on Microsoft 365 services, right? Because in this webinar series, we are not planning to cover the basics of Microsoft 365. That's not what this webinar series is meant for. So we hope that you have a decent amount of understanding and you also have a good working experience on Microsoft 365. All right, so let's move forward. So how do we plan to run this webinar series? So the first few sessions, we want to dedicate it mostly for the introductory stuff where we talk about what is Copilot for Microsoft 365, the architecture, how you set up things and stuff. And then we'll slowly deep dive into the core meat, right? Where we want to talk about, deployment. We want to talk about customization. We want to talk about security. We want to talk about, how you prepare your tenant for this, so on and so forth. The goal is to have at least 15 to 18 sessions, but a time will tell. Maybe we might even end up doing more sessions than this because the service is still expanding. Microsoft is constantly adding a lot. So we have the Microsoft build around the corner, and I'm sure a lot of new features or important updates will be planned for that. And then we also have Ignite, which is coming around. So as I said, we are planning to wrap this entire thing within 15 to 18 sessions, but it's so possible that we might end up doing more also. And all these sessions will be announced in the Microsoft 365 Power Platform and Cloud Security India meetup group. So if you're not a member, please make sure that you become one of them. And also please help to spread the word to your colleagues and like-minded people so that they can also be benefited from this session. So these sessions will be recorded and it will be shared in my YouTube channel. So that's the URL for my YouTube channel. And we'll also send you the links, the recorded links. So each session will be running for about 60 minutes, but not necessarily this session. As I said, this is a very small one, but typically we tend to do a 60-minute session wherein 50 minutes is for the session in itself and the last 10 minutes is for Q&A. All right, so today we have a very crisp agenda. We want to talk about how Copilot for Microsoft 365 works. So basically, I want to talk in detail about the architecture, how things are set up under the hoods, what happens, things like that. So how the different components come together to give you the desired results. So Copilot for Microsoft 365 it's just not a single service, right? There are a lot of things which are working underneath it to make the service what it is, right? So we'll be talking about how all these different components come together. And I'll also be touching about privacy and data residence, because that is the core of everything that you want to do, right? Of course, the service could be cool, but you also want to understand what about security, what about privacy, what about compliance, and what about data residency, right? Because this is an enterprise-wide service. This is mostly it's enterprises who are going to use it. So you want to make sure that you understand that as well. Okay, so how Copilot for Microsoft 365 works. So I'm pretty sure a lot of you might have seen the architecture diagram. So let's begin here, right? So these are the different components that come together to make up for you to have the the Copilot for Microsoft 365 experience, right? So you have the Microsoft 365 apps, your favorite apps. It could be Word, Excel, PowerPoint, SharePoint, right? It could be coming in from Teams. So all these are the Microsoft 365 apps. Then you also have the business chat. I'm talking about the Teams chat. Then you have Microsoft Graph, which is basically your data, and then also the semantic index, which is basically the indexing, right? So basically, these are the main different components that come together to give you the desired results in Copilot for Microsoft 365. And always be rest assured that this is just another service, like let's say a SharePoint Online or an Exchange Online or OneDrive for Business or whatever, right? So the security, compliance, and privacy principles which Microsoft has always promised for applies for Copilot for Microsoft 365 as well, right? And in addition to that, we also have the responsible AI principles, which is where we talk about the proper usage of AI, right? So there are I think there are some 5 to 6 points about this. So even those considerations, when those points are taken into considerations when Copilot for Microsoft 365 generates the results. So we'll talk in detail about this. So this is a very high level architecture about how Copilot for Microsoft 365 works. Now let's sort of break this pieces. Let's see what happens in each and every single step, so that will help us understand more about what's happening here. So the very first thing, as you can see, right? So consider this, that you are a user here and you are trying to give a prompt. Like this could be your favorite canvas. It could be, think of Microsoft Word, think of Microsoft Excel, or it could be Microsoft PowerPoint or even Teams, right? You open that, you open the Copilot, Microsoft 365 Copilot add-in, and then you put in a prompt, right? So what happens when you put in the user prompt? So this prompt goes with WSS. These are WebSockets, right? So this prompt is taken to the core Copilot engine, right? So whatever happens after this is basically happening inside the tenant, which is inside the Microsoft 365 service boundary, which is basically inside your tenant. Nothing is happening outside your tenant, it's inside your tenant. So the first step is that you're given your user prompt. Now the second step is called as grounding or pre-processing. So what this means is the Copilot engine, it sort of takes your prompt and it does something called as a pre-processing or grounding, meaning it tries to look at where exactly it should be looking for the information for the prompt that you have given, right? So that's where it goes to the Microsoft Graph. So pretty much everybody who has been working on Microsoft services understand what is Microsoft Graph, right? It's pretty much your data, the documents that you have created or the documents that you're working on or the documents that have been shared with you, the meetings that you participate, the people whom you work with. So pretty much everything that you do has a graph correlation to it. Everything is interconnected, right? So pretty much it comes here to get the data that you have asked for. But it could so happen that these data could also be lying somewhere externally, right? So maybe it wants to get the information from the internet, which is where it goes to Bing, or it could be it wants to get the data from a third-party service, right? Let's say it wants to talk to ServiceNow. Let's say it wants to talk to Workday, right? Let's say it wants to talk to a different third-party cloud service which is used in your organization, right? So these are toggles, these are configurations that you can go ahead and set up. And just mute. Yeah, these are configurations that you can set up in your tenant. And even if you want the results to come from your Power Platform services, even that is possible, right? So this is where we have given you the toggle button. So please be mindful that it's just not the data which is coming from Microsoft 365. It could also be data coming from externally also. It could be information which is coming from a third-party service also. The data, the results can be coming from Power Platform also. And all this is configurable as an administrator on the Microsoft 365 admin portal. And we'll be talking in detail in our future sessions, right? Now, the third step from here is, so whatever happens after the second stage. So this goes to something else called as a modified prompt, which means from here, it goes to the LLM, to the large language model to sort of process the result, right? So this is where the RAI, the responsible AI thing, which I spoke about, right? So it performs all those RAI on the prompt, right? And it also makes sure that it talks to the Azure OpenAI instance. Now you might be wondering, now where is this Azure OpenAI instance? Am I supposed to go ahead and spin up a new Azure OpenAI instance, or where is this Azure OpenAI instance sitting? So the moment you subscribe for Microsoft 365 Copilot, this Azure OpenAI instance, it's already there. That's the way Microsoft has set up their architecture, right? It's part of your tenant. But please be mindful that OpenAI doesn't have access to your tenant's data, and Microsoft doesn't use your data to sort of go ahead and train their models and stuff, right? And the prompts, responses, and grounding data aren't used to train their foundation models also. And after this, what happens is the LLM, it generates a response and it comes back to the Microsoft graph. And then on the response which is coming back from the LLM, there is something called as, this is called as the post-processing. This is where the compliance and purview check happens. So what I mean by this is, whatever response is coming back from here, it needs to make sure that you as a user have access to the data. Now you might be wondering that, what if I try to ask for something and if I don't have access to that data, will I be able to see it? The answer is no, you won't be able to see it, right? And whatever you as a user are performing, will it get audited somewhere? All your prompts, yes, it will get audited somewhere. So that's where the compliance and Microsoft Purview things comes into picture. So everything that you do gets audited. If you are generating a prompt, it could be from Word, it could be from Excel, or wherever it is, everything gets audited. And finally is when you get your response back to yourself as a user. So everything, whatever you saw, all the 6 steps, it happens within few minutes. But it feels like it's just happening just like that, within just like that. But then that's not what's happening. There is a lot of back and forth which happens inside it. And also when you're generating a large prompt, you would say that it's taking some time because so much of information needs to happen in the backend. A lot of this would make sense when we are talking about how to prepare your tenant for Copilot for Microsoft 365, when we are touching on security, compliance, and privacy topics in detail. But at a very high level, please bear in mind that these are sort of the 6 steps which happens inside your tenant to process and give you the result that you're looking for. And everything that you see here inside this violet box, that is within the Microsoft 365 service boundary. So you don't need to be worried that what is Microsoft taking data outside, or are they trying to process my prompt response somewhere else, right? So that's not what's happening. Everything is happening inside your tenant only. So Microsoft Graph, as I said, this is sort of the heart of what's happening inside Copilot for Microsoft 365. And as you already worked, and for people who already been working on Copilot in Microsoft 365, you know that pretty much everything that you do is inside is going inside Microsoft Graph. I wouldn't call it as a database. Think of it as a programmability model, right? And as I said, your meetings, the people whom you work with, your mails, your documents, everything is there inside Microsoft Graph. So it's very easy when you ask a response to Copilot for it to go here and then give you the response back to you. Now there is something called as retrieval augmented generation, right? This is sort of how it generates the results for you. And this is just not a concept which is specific only to Copilot for Microsoft 365, even if you're talking about AI in terms of Amazon, or AI in terms of Google or OpenAI, or it could be any AI model that you're talking about, right? So this concept of retrieval augmented generation, it's uniform across it. It's an industry term. It's in fact a concept about how generative AI works and how it produces all this results, right? But in the context of Copilot for Microsoft 365, this is what happens. So you give the user prompt, the prompt that you're giving, right? It could be like, hey, can you create a document on, let's say, the benefits of SharePoint Online? I'm just making up things, right? You could just give in a prompt. And then the grounding data, you're telling the prompt where exactly to go and look, right? You could sort of in the prompt itself say that I want you to look into my organization's intranet portal and give me the result. Or you could also say that you want this to go and search externally also. So all those, the more and more you're being more specific in your prompt, the better the results it would be. If you do not want your prompt to go ahead look elsewhere, then you can clearly tell that I want you to look only inside this particular repository and give me the information. And then there is also the chat history, right? So the more and more you keep talking to Copilot for Microsoft 365, it understands more about you as a user, right? What is that you do and everything. So this chat history is also there, it's saved. So this is where I was speaking about the e-discovery and audit. So everything that you do, it gets audited. That can also be used for e-discovery purposes as well. And then finally, the system prompt. So all these things come together, and this is what is generating the answer for you, right? A lot of these things happens in the backend. So it so happens that, a very quick hack, which you guys really want to go ahead and try, right? Say, for instance, I'm sure a lot of you are using ChatGPT, OpenAI's ChatGPT, right? You might have been using it at least for a year or at least for the past 6 months, right? So do this thing, just go back today whenever you're free and just go to your OpenAI, open it and just ask this query. Hey, OpenAI, what is that you think about me as a person? What are my dislikes? What are my likes? You can ask a lot of questions personally about you to OpenAI, and you will be surprised to know how much accurate details it can give to you, right? Sometimes it could be intimidating to see that an AI model can know so much about you, but on the back end, it's sort of trying to understand, because given all the prompts that you're giving, all the data, all the questions that you're asking, it's trying to learn and understand more and more and more about you. And I swear you would be really surprised by the accuracy of the result that it can give to you. Okay, so at a very high level, as I was talking about, so this is what makes up the Copilot for Microsoft 365 architecture, and these are all the different components that we just spoke about. Now let's sort of, pivot and talk in detail about the privacy and data residency, right? Because this is really, really core. This is really important because we really want to understand what's happening in terms of privacy. What about data residency? Is that taken care of? So all this kind of stuff. So for this, I'm going to bring up a different slide. There was an interesting presentation which was made on Ignite on this topic. And I sort of want to bring that and talk in detail about it. Okay. So when we talk about Microsoft's approach towards privacy, right? These are the 4 important things that you need to bear in mind. The first and foremost is you control your data, meaning you're the custodian for your data. Okay. Of course, you're making use of Microsoft's service, but you are the custodian. You control your data. So, and you know where your data is located. So when you sort of sign up for the service, it could be Microsoft Azure or Microsoft 365. It is you who chooses where your tenant has to be spinned up, right? So which means it is you who say where your data has to be stored. If it is in India, then it is in India, right? If you're in Singapore or Singapore, if you're in the UK, so based upon whichever geographical location you belong to, that's where you would choose your data. And we secure your data at rest and transit. When I say we, Microsoft, it's Microsoft's job to make sure that they secure your data at rest and in transit. Now, what I mean by data at rest and in transit, data at rest means think of the data that is stored in OneDrive, the data that is stored in SharePoint. These are data that are kept on rest. When I say data in transit, think of an email that you're sending, think of a chat message that you're sending. So all these things are secure. And then finally, Microsoft also defends your data, right? If you want to read in detail about it, just go ahead and Google and talk about Google and see about defense in depth approach, right? It talks about how Microsoft secures their data centers, what are the different security protocols that they have, what are the different security standards that they have. It's really exciting to go ahead and read in detail about that. But From a privacy perspective, these are the four important things that you need to bear in mind, and this is common across any Microsoft service. So now, where does Microsoft store customer data? Right now, this is very, very important, right? And it's very important that you understand how Microsoft does this. Now, say for instance, if you're a customer and you've signed up for Microsoft 365, right? And you're saying India has to be your geographical location. So it so happens that SharePoint Online, Exchange Online, Microsoft Teams, or OneDrive, since all these services are available in India as a geographical location, all your data that you're storing will also be stored in India as a geographical location. Now, for instance, if that is, think about Microsoft Forms, right? Or think about Microsoft Bookings. But there are certain services which are not available across the globe. They are only available in a certain region. For instance, Microsoft Forms is only available in the US. And that could be some unique services like that. For instance, I don't know, maybe Microsoft Loop, or there are certain services which are not present everywhere. They're only present in a certain geographical location. So even though your geographical location is India, there are only a few set of services which will be stored there. Some services, just because they don't store it there, it will be stored in a different location. So it's very, very important that you understand where Microsoft stores your data and what is the service and or which region which service is available. I'm sure this is the same case for Microsoft Azure also. Not every service is available in all the regions. And data residency applies to customers' data at rest. Now, as I said, yes, as I certain services which I spoke about, right? So like SatPoint, Exchange, and OneDrive. So data residency applies to data at rest. But on the contrary, you also need to understand that data residency does not apply to data in transit, meaning when your data is in transit, when you're doing a Teams call, when you're doing let's say a Teams chat message, when you're trying to send an email, then there is no concept of data residency, right? You could be sitting in India and sending a mail all the way to the US, which means it has to go over the internet, it has to cross regions. And so there is no concept of data residency there. The same could be for a chat message also. So please bear in mind that your data residency is only available for data at rest and not in transit. Microsoft encrypts customers' data at rest and in transit. So even though data residency doesn't apply for your data which is in transit, but encryption is rest assured, encryption is guaranteed, right? So encryption happens for data which is kept in rest, and encryption happens for data which is also kept in transit. And these are some Microsoft offerings for several data residency options. So whatever I said, right? Some companies would be totally okay with that. Some companies will be like, that's totally fine, I'm okay with that. But if at all you worked with a European customer, or if at all you happen to live in Europe, for instance, Germany, or there are so many other countries, they are very, very strict about their data residency policies, right? Specifically entire Europe for that matter. So for those kind of customers, Microsoft has something called as the EUDB. Then there is an offering called as multi-geo capabilities or advanced data residency ADR, right? Now, a deep dive into all these different service offerings, that's like a level 400 topic. Maybe in our future sessions, we'll talk in detail about that. But if data residency is of utmost priority to you, for you as a customer or for you as an organization, then please bear in mind that there are such offerings also which you can take advantage of. And talk to Microsoft. There is an add-on license for that for every single user that you need to purchase, and you can just apply those licenses. And then based upon the user's geographical location, so every user, say for instance, if you're a customer who has your headquarters in the US, your tenant's centralized location will be in the US, but you'll also have satellite locations for all this data in each and every single country, right? In India, you can have a satellite location. In the UK, you can have something. So I'm sure multi-geo is something which a lot of you are aware of. If not, just go ahead and read about that. And then you also have the advanced data residency. So these are all individual additional licenses that you need to purchase. And the reason why I'm making this point is this is also applicable for your Copilot for Microsoft 365 as well, right? So this was not something which was available for Copilot for Microsoft 365 when they initially launched it, or when initially the product went GA, but last March is when your data residency, things such as your EUDB or things such as your ADR or multi-geo is applicable for Copilot for Microsoft 365 as well. Let's talk about Copilot privacy and data. So you control your data, as I said. So Microsoft does not use customer data to train foundational LLMs that Copilot use. So this is something that you constantly need to be aware of. So you might be wondering, so where does Microsoft has this huge of a data set or data for them to go ahead and train all their models? Of course, there should be somewhere they're training all this, right? But they have their own data sets for this. So Microsoft has made it very clear that they're not making use of the customers' data to go ahead and train their models. The next thing that you want to understand is whatever you're using for Copilot for Microsoft 365, right? So Copilot, these are the underlying commitments. For instance, this is a good read for you to go ahead and read Microsoft products and service data protection and addendum. This is a lot of data for you to go ahead and read, right? I can't just visually show how these things work. But then if you're somebody who's interested on this, if you work as a data protection officer, you're into data security, or if you come from a cybersecurity background, because some companies have this mandate that they want to produce all this, or the service which they're going after, they need to make sure that it's following all the standards, or they want a document which says that the service which they're going after abides by all this. So all this information is publicly available. I would highly recommend that you go ahead and read. So Copilot for Microsoft 365 as a service is also something which abides by all of this. And as I said, the ADR and multi-geo capability, which is a data residency offering, when it's available starting from March 1, 2024 onwards, right? So that was not the case when the product went GA. Now, everything which I spoke about, right? It might have looked a bit cloudy for you. Okay, Vignesh, how about some scenarios, man? I mean, you're just talking between the lines, right? So, can you give us some scenarios? We want to understand if this is a customer scenario, what it would look like. If this is a different customer scenario, what it would look like. So, these are some scenarios which I want to throw out there, right? So, just imagine Contessa Beatmore is a company which is based in Brussels with a sign-up location in Belgium, which means they are in Europe. It goes without saying, right? Now, the storage of Copilot data. So, Contessa B Corp Copilot data is stored in their home EU. It's just because they are an EU customer, they need to make sure that they are sticking to EU DB. So, even their Copilot data is also stored inside EU. And the processing of Copilot data will also happen inside EU. Okay. Now, here's the next scenario. So, Contessa M Corp is a company based in New York, US, with a sign-up location in the US. Okay. Now, what about storage of Copilot data? So, Contessa M Corp's Copilot data is stored in North America, but it could also be stored anywhere. Now, here's the catch, right? So, these kind of, and it's in the US, then this core data residency principles is not applying for the second scenario. And also, Contessa M Corp's Copilot data is mostly processed in North America, but it could also be processed anywhere. So, this is something that you need to bear in mind. And here's another scenario. Contessa Y Corp is a Japanese company based in Tokyo with a sign-up location in Japan. And Contessa Y Corp's Copilot data is stored in Japan, but it could also be stored anywhere. And in terms of the processing of Copilot data is all other geographies, including Japan, for Contessa Y Corp, Copilot may call into any available region. So they're clearly saying that, there are no current commitments to regional storage of Copilot data beyond EU DB. So if this is something that you're into, then everything happens within EU. But if it's not something which you're into, then it's possible that your Copilot data could be stored in a different geography location, and even the processing could be done in a different thing. I think this simply because the availability of the service, right? Right now, Copilot for Microsoft 365 is still a service which is growing. And I'm pretty sure not every data center of Microsoft has it, but over a period of time, maybe this will happen. But currently, this is what it is. And this is some sort of, it's a bit of an old slide deck by now. Things could have changed to a certain extent. I don't have much details on it, but please bear in mind that these are some things that you need to be mindful of. Okay, I think that's pretty much what I wanted to cover. As I said, this is a very simple, I want to keep this session very, very simple. And in our next session, we'll be talking about how to prepare your tenant for Copilot for Microsoft 365, right? So if you're somebody who's into, deploying this service for your customer or for your own organization, right? So how to get started, what are the things that you need to be mindful of? What about the adoption? What are the different phases that you need to go through? So we'll go step by step. So that's what we are planning to do from next session onwards. So that is something that is exciting and something that you're looking forward to. So please make sure that you join the next session, and we'll sort of do a deep dive into that. All right, so that's about it. So if at all you folks have any questions, now would be the time to go ahead and put your questions in the chat, or if you want, you can also unmute and ask your questions.